This is a video summary and reaction to the Trump-Axios interview that aired within the last 24 hours. Today is August 4th. Hey everyone, me Kevin here. You may have heard about this Axios-Trump interview that's been grabbing headlines as a nail-biter. Let's summarize it for you right here. Just remember, this video is sponsored by life insurance you can get in as little as 5 minutes from your phone without talking to anybody, and you can get 2 free stocks when you deposit $100 with the stock trading platform Webull. Links down below. Let's get started. Jonathan Swan of Axios interviewed Donald Trump. Here's what he said. First, the interview really starts out on the topic of COVID. Jonathan directly asked Trump why Donald Trump would hold a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That people don't believe the news, they believe what the president does. So when the president does something, and the president says, hey, it's okay to go out and have a rally and go into public spaces, other people are likely to follow that lead. And they want answers from Trump. To this, Donald Trump says, well, that area was very good. That state was almost free of cases, and cases didn't spike until 1.5 to 2 months later. Jonathan then asked, but Trump, 1,000 deaths. Do you think that's the best we can do? Referring to the death count that we're seeing in the United States today. And Donald Trump to that says, well, some governors aren't doing so well. Governors are in control. I've provided them with supplies. I can name the good ones. I can name the bad ones. Jonathan says, you've changed your message in this last week, in the last 2 weeks. You've said that it'll get worse before it gets better. That was a Trump quote. And said that, yes, we should wear masks. Jonathan asks, the question is, will you stick with your message? And Trump says, well, it won't get as bad as it was, but yes. And it should have been stopped. It should have been stopped by China. It came from China. This is serious. Jonathan asks, when can you commit that every American will have access to same-day testing, like what's available at the White House? Trump says, we have tested more people than all of Europe put together 2 times over. Read the books, read the manuals. Some say we test too much. Jonathan asks, what books? And Trump says, well, the only problem we have right now is some people have to wait. We're at 50% of people who have to wait to get their testing results. The other 50% do get immediate testing results. In some cases, that means it's 3 to 5 days, and there's nothing you can do about it in those areas. Now, that means we have half, but Trump says we don't know how soon we could get everybody access to immediate testing. But because we test so much, we see more cases, and some of our tests are obsolete, and now we're working on that. This is when tension begins to sort of boil between the interviewer and Trump, especially because the reporter asks if Trump thinks that the virus is under control and says thousands are dying every day, to which Trump says, yes, thousands are dying every day, but it is what it is. This, by the way, has been taken out of context of the interview, or perhaps within context of the interview, I suppose it depends how you look at it, by the Biden camp already, and the Biden camp has already been circulating new marketing videos on Twitter and other platforms with Donald Trump's voice and sort of sorrowful music over the background, echoing Trump saying, it is what it is, in response to the virus. Anyway, discussions continue, and Trump cuts off Jonathan and says, I see you smiling. Look, we show more cases because we test more. This is because things were getting a little heated, and Jonathan was kind of doing, they probably shouldn't have been smiling, right? A little bit of that slight kind of sarcastic smile, like, but I disagree with you. A little bit of that kind of smile. Oh, okay. Everybody can kind of make their own judgment call on that. Jonathan says, but let's look at deaths. Trump, as soon as he hears deaths, pulls out a stack of papers and says, okay, let's. Here. Right here, the U.S. is lower than the world. Trump takes the paper and hands it to the reporter. The reporter looks at it and says, oh, you're talking deaths as a proportion of cases. I'm talking about deaths as a proportion of the population. We're doing way worse than the rest of the world. Now, pause for a second. Let me clarify, because this is a little confusing. I paused for a moment and wanted to clarify this myself. Jonathan is reporting that there are more deaths in our country than any other country on a population basis. This is like saying this. Let's say you live in a city that has 500,000 people and 100 people died of COVID. And then there's another city that has 500,000 people and 50 people died of COVID. Well, obviously the one with 100 deaths looks like it's doing worse than the one with 50 deaths. So when you look at deaths by population, that's the comparison that you get. How many people are dying for every 100,000 or every, 1 million people that a country has? The interesting thing about Jonathan's statistic is when you look at deaths by population, it doesn't matter what case counts are. It doesn't matter if you test a little, and it doesn't matter if you test a lot. You still get the same comparison. Ooh, that area is doing worse than the other area. Donald Trump sees it differently and says, no. You have to look at deaths based on how many cases we have, and then says, which we have so many cases because you test more. All right, so you have to make your kind of conclusion on which statistic you prefer. Trump says you can't use deaths by population, you have to go by cases. Jonathan says it should be a percentage of deaths per population, and they kind of argue back and forth on that. Trump says we're winning here, and Jonathan, you should report it that way. Jonathan says, well, I don't. All right. Trump then goes on to say death is way down from where it was, to which Jonathan says, yes, it was 2,000, then it went to 500, but now it's back at 1,000. Why is it going up? And Trump says, well, it's going down again. But again, we've done more testing, so we have more cases. The topic then transitions. This, in my opinion, would have been the perfect time to transition the conversation to stimulus. Yet, stimulus, despite that being on everybody's mind, whether you're an investor, you're a renter, you're a landlord, it doesn't matter who you are, everybody's wondering about stimulus, was not brought up in this conversation. So instead, we have the following. We go on to talking about, what about Russian bounties with soldiers? Trump spoke with Putin. Why didn't Trump ask Putin or talk to Putin about that? Trump says that didn't reach my desk. I read a lot of my briefings. That's fake news. It didn't reach my desk. And on election day, and then the conversation evolved into Afghanistan, on election day, we'll be down to 4,000 to 5,000 soldiers in Afghanistan. It used to be at around 8,000 to 9,000 when Trump took office. Trump says we shouldn't be in the Middle East. The interviewer then asks, well, Trump, and he's changing topics fast, and that's normal in an interview like this, says, you told us you couldn't tell us if you would accept the results of the election. Trump took this as an opportunity to talk about a new phenomenon, mail-in ballots. Trump says that people are getting ballots for dogs or dead family members. Jonathan says, no, those aren't ballots, those are applications, and here's your campaign putting out publicity saying you should register for mail-in balloting. Trump says, well, we're dealing with that in lawsuits, and obviously we have to play the game the way the game is played right now, so that's just what we have to deal with. And Trump says, especially with tight margins. That's really interesting because he said that in context of, yeah, but you could end up having an election that won't be decided on November 3rd, especially with tight margins. We're challenging it. That was really interesting because it kind of got me thinking, okay, was that Donald Trump kind of letting out that he realizes margins might be tight this November? Interesting. We could see that however you want. They then talked about Mrs. Maxwell. Why did you wish Mrs. Maxwell well? She was arrested for child sex trafficking. And Trump kind of brushed this off as saying, look, I don't want to wish anyone bad. Let the system decide. On Portland, Oregon, Donald Trump reiterates a stance that he's had for a while, that protesters are anarchists, that these antics are the problem, and it's not law enforcement that's the problem. And the reason there are unmarked police officers is because anarchists are following police officers home and harassing them. Regarding people being detained without cause, Donald Trump says, well, they're being investigated. Have you seen the disaster that's going on? It's so violent. We now have a new rule. If you touch a courthouse in terms of damaging it, you go to jail for 10 years. Trump was then asked, have you ever met with a Black Lives Matter leader? And Trump says, well, I initially didn't get a good start with Black Lives Matter because when I first heard of the program, the slogan was pigs in a blanket, burn them like bacon, which was a reference to pigs, meaning policemen. And so Donald Trump says he got a bad start with Black Lives Matter, but then argues that nobody has asked to meet with Donald Trump from Black Lives Matter, and he would be open to that. Finally, Donald Trump is asked, do you believe police treat blacks differently? And what are you going to do about it? And Trump says, I have seen differences and there shouldn't be. I don't like it. I don't know why. It speaks to something unacceptable. And then goes on to tout his record about how he's done more than any president since Abraham Lincoln, opportunity zones, prison reform, Civil Rights Act, and basically everything was better under Trump's administration up until the pandemic is what Trump says, which, by the way, the Federal Reserve has also found that, yes, as the economy was recovering leading up to the pandemic, minority groups were benefiting from the recovery more than at any point in the last 10 years, probably because the Great Recession in part had basically reset everyone down, created this massive wealth gap between the rich and the poor, created the 1% versus the 99%, the marches on Wall Street that we saw, Occupy Wall Street movements, and so on and so forth. And unfortunately, this pandemic has now again sort of exacerbated the differences between the wealthy and the poor. The rich are getting richer, the PPP loans are bailing out the rich more, and well, the people are struggling. It's almost very difficult now to get stimulus money through, as we see with the holdup in Congress, that it's like impossible to even get the unemployment package and new stimulus package passed in a reasonable time frame and without stress and massive anxiety. All right. Well, there's your summary of this entire interview. Obviously, look at it the way you want to look at it. I think everybody should make their own judgments from this. This is just sort of my summary of it. I encourage you to watch the interview in full. I will link it down below. Hopefully this helped you get a little bit of a summary. And if you like this, consider subscribing to the channel, get your life insurance, get your 2 free stocks, and we'll see you next time.